This is the lecture for Module 4. We're reading Donna Haraway's book, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Chthulucene. It's published in 2016. Donna Haraway is a feminist philosopher of science. She's the author of several, really many important books. I'll name a few of them here. Her 1991 book, Simians, Cyborgs, and Women, The Reinvention of Nature, was probably her most influential work. She introduces the concept of the cyborg in this text, exploring the relationship between modern technologies, biology, and gender. She's also the author of the book in 2003, The Companion Species Manifesto, Dogs, People, and Significant Otherness. Haraway's dog, Cayenne, I believe late dog, Cayenne, is very often mentioned in her writing as an example of companion species and the way that what it means to be human is not some self-enclosed essence, but really that we are kin with others. And as we'll see in her more recent book, I believe her most recent book, she's mostly retired at this point, this text, Staying with the Trouble, she proposes this term sympoiesis as a replacement for autopoiesis being this term that came out of the theoretical biology and cognitive science of the Chilean biologists Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela. Autopoiesis for them was an account of the self-production, the self-making abilities of living organisms. They use the single cell, the individual cell, as an example of an autopoietic animal or organism. And they're inheriting a line of thinking that you could say goes back to Kant's critique of judgment, where he talks about the self-organization of living organisms that makes organisms irreducible to the mechanical forms of causality known to our type of understanding. Kant thought we could explain all of nature mechanistically except for the living aspects of nature. He famously said that even a mere blade of grass could not be explained in a Newtonian way, right? Just by reference to external causes, because there's something circular about the causality of living organisms, and autopoiesis was meant to capture this. The way that all the parts of an organism conspire to produce not only the whole to which they belong, but one another, right? So there's this recursive feedback loop, which Kant called self-organization, and which Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela called autopoiesis. And in Staying with the Trouble, Haraway doesn't so much mean to criticize this approach to biology, but rather to amend it by reminding us that, nothing makes itself, strictly speaking, that every cell depends upon an environment of other cells and nutrients and other elements and so on, out of which it composes itself. And so creatures never precede their relations. And sympoiesis is Haraway's attempt to capture this fact. So in Staying with the Trouble, and I'll only say a bit about this text because I'm going to share a lecture that Haraway gave about this book, and so she can lay it out herself, but just a few words of reflection on this text, and then I'll say more about the essay, the article of hers published in 1988 on situated knowledges. So in Staying with the Trouble, Haraway is trying to speak to urgencies, environmental, ecological urgencies, and social and cultural urgencies that need stories. And she means big enough stories, not too big stories. A too big story would be a sort of universalizing story about, say, the human species as the new masters of the planet. And she's very critical of the whole discourse around the Anthropocene and the very name Anthropocene as a too big story, right? And so she wants partial stories. She wants stories of multi-species co-creativity and the tangled webs that connect human beings to one another and to the non-human worlds, really. This is a course on the pluriverse, after all. So she's encouraging us to tell stories, and I'm inviting all of you to engage in this multi-species story making in this form of speculative fiction, which at the end of Staying with the Trouble, Haraway exemplifies for us with her Camille stories about the near-term future of planet Earth and the human or post-human, depending on how you look at it, future. So she's in this text, she's thinking with other feminist philosophers of science like Isabel Stengers, who's inheriting Whitehead's speculative philosophy. She's also thinking with Bruno Latour, who we will read later this semester. And she's offering feminist criticisms and reconstructions of the life sciences, of neo-Darwinian adaptationist evolutionary stories in particular. She values the biological sciences tremendously, and much of her career has been focused on surfacing the metaphors that do so much work in the biological sciences, often in a veiled or unacknowledged way, right? Privileging a kind of masculinist view from nowhere, and she's trying to retain a form of scientific realism, but rooted in the partial perspectives of non-white male perspectives. And so it's not that she would want to just erase those perspectives. She just wants to pluralize the form of perspective that is given the privilege of so-called objectivity, right? And here I'm already getting into her 1988 article. The figure of the cyborg, as I mentioned, is really important for her. She thinks we have always already been cyborgs, in the sense that we are cybernetic organisms. You could say even the alphabet is already a kind of machine that we have learned how to use by allowing it to enter into and reform our very biology. Our brains have co-evolved with our languages, and alphabetic technologies in particular have afforded us, have provided many of the conditions of possibility for scientific rationality, you might say. And aside from alphabetic technologies, of course, nowadays we have all sorts of information technologies, computer prostheses that extend our capacity for vision as well as for action, right? And so she really wants to highlight the way in which we really need to avoid any sense of a pure human essence that would set us apart from the technical devices or extensions or prostheses, as she'll refer to them in her 1988 article. What makes us human is precisely our entanglement with these technologies, right? So she's really embracing the cyborg label, and so avoiding what some ecofeminists might have been pushing for, a kind of strategic essentialism, you might say, that would distinguish the natural from the artificial or technical. She's saying these sorts of essentialist dichotomies don't serve us if we're trying to understand the concrete ontologies within which we are, forced to think and to be. So there's a really wonderful chapter that details our ethical entanglements with one another and with the non-human world, where Haraway looks at the synthesis of artificial estrogen from horse urine, and she looks at the history of this and the animal rights issues and the way that synthetic estrogens have also been helpful to not only human beings that need these drugs, but her own dog Cayenne needed these drugs, and it's all very ethically fraught, of course, and she reflects on her struggle with this question. Is the suffering of horses to produce the urine from which this estrogen is extracted, is it justified to help her pet dog suffer less, right? Or humans who need these drugs suffer less? And so she doesn't give a clear, definitive answers here, but she invites us to, as she puts it, damp down the certainty of villainy, right? I think it's a very mature response to an ethical inquiry that remains open-ended, just like scientific inquiry should remain an open-ended conversation. Finally, she enters into a dialogue. She thinks with the philosopher and scientist Vinciane Despret, Despret. She's Belgian. I'm probably not getting the French pronunciation of her last name correctly, but in any event, Despret goes into the field with an Israeli biologist studying a certain species of bird, and what she realizes in the course of studying the scientists studying birds is that, as Haraway puts it, what scientists actually do in the field affects the ways animals see their scientists seeing them, and therefore how the animals respond. So this is highlighting the extent to which ethology, the study of animal behavior, is always participatory. Despret coins this term anthropozoogenesis to capture the way that humans and animals are always creating each other, creating one another's behavior in the context of these participatory encounters. So then in the end of this book, which I'm inviting you to read as a supplemental reading, if you're interested in doing a kind of speculative fiction for your midterm and or final project, read these Camille stories and use them as an example to engage in speculative fiction writing in service to imagining livable futures and the sorts of ethical entanglements that we might find ourselves in as we move into a post-human era, right, where the boundaries between species shift and where our sense of who counts as kin to us widen, hopefully. So then let me just say a bit about this other article I've assigned, Situated Knowledges, the Science Question in Feminism and the Privilege of Partial Perspective. So in this article, Haraway's really trying to redefine and redeem scientific objectivity, right? She wants to challenge what she calls the God trick of disembodied, transcendent views from nowhere, And she wants to reconstruct objectivity. So she's not just saying objectivity is a sham. She wants to reconstruct it in a feminist vein by showing how a more robust and realistic conception of objectivity would be one that's composed of a plurality of partial perspectives. And she really wants to avoid this false dichotomy that she sees between a form of strong social constructionism and a form of naive scientific realism, right? So the strong social constructionist project had it that all knowledge claims can ultimately be reduced to power grabs, right? And rather than just denying that this is to a greater or lesser extent true of many masculinist, patriarchal forms of techno-capitalist industrial science, she wants to show how we can do science differently. She wants to preserve some sense of objectivity, some sense of a real world out there that scientific practice can approach and get to know, always as a knowing with, as a relational knowing, not a relationship of mastery that would separate the knowing subject from an inert passive object, but rather a relational knowing. She calls this a successor science, or she draws on another feminist philosopher, Sandra Harding's idea of a successor science, a science which would replace the God trick form of science, which, as we've seen, form of science which would imagine the knower as holding a transcendent perspective above what it's studying. This is an inheritance of a certain form of theology, medieval theology, that imagined God as entirely transcendent and above and beyond the created world, right? And so in our last two modules, studying Keller's critique of this idea of a transcendent, all-powerful deity, we can see how it translates into a new approach to science, a successor science, which would imagine science differently, right? As approaching objectivity through the assemblage of many partial perspectives, a plurality of partial perspectives, rather than a monolithic view from nowhere. So, Haraway wants better accounts of the real world. She doesn't want to reduce all science to merely power grabs. Now, in her own words, as she puts it on page 579, she says, "I think my problem and our problem is how to have simultaneously an account of radical historical contingency for all knowledge claims and knowing subjects, a critical practice for recognizing our own semiotic technologies for making meanings, and a no-nonsense commitment to faithful accounts of a real world, one that can be partially shared and that is friendly to earthwide projects of finite freedom, adequate material abundance, modest meaning in suffering, and limited happiness." So she's seeking, again, a form of objectivity that avoids transcendence, right? Relational objectivity is one way to describe what she's searching for. She has a wonderful critique of certain myths about technologically mediated vision. We are already in 1988, she was discussing astronomical images that produce these full color images of planetary bodies and so on. And, she's just pointing out the ways in which these images are technologically mediated, highly constructed, and that we need to be more attentive to the way that what appears to be a view from nowhere, as if we were actually out there floating in space, as if the God trick were truly possible, that really, what these satellites are taking in is a form of data that, amazingly, we're able to decode and translate into an image in color that makes sense to our simian eyes, right? Our hominid eyes. And this is, again, amazing. It's quite a technological feat, but we're encouraged to background the technological mediation and the constructed dimension of these images, right? Nowadays, we have these amazing images coming back from the James Webb Space Telescope, and there's an even greater degree of technological mediation and construction going on here to produce these beautiful images. It's not that they aren't real. It's not that we aren't gaining insight into the nature of the objective world out there. It's just that it's not an unmediated gaze into space, right? There's a lot of construction going on here, and she's just inviting us to remember this. There's no such thing as a view from nowhere. Right, so as she writes, these color-enhanced snapshots of the outer planets they're reassembled from digitalized signals transmitted across vast space, and they let the viewer experience the moment of discovery and immediate vision of the object. And they're presented as if they're indubitable recordings of what is simply there, right, as heroic feats of technoscientific production. And she's just pointing out that this view of infinite vision is an illusion, right? We need to move towards a less disembodied form of scientific myth, really, towards a more realistic, embodied form of scientific knowledge production, where objectivity, as she puts it, turns out to be about particular and specific embodiment, and definitely not about the false vision promising transcendence of all limits and all responsibility. So from her point of view, only partial perspective promises objective vision. Feminist objectivity, she continues, this is 583, is about limited location and situated knowledge, not about transcendence and splitting of subject and object, right? So there is no unmediated photograph or passive camera obscura in scientific accounts. She also talks about taking on the vantage points of the subjugated, but she does so with a note of caution, right? So there have been so many perspectives marginalized by the patriarchal enforcement of this transcendent view from nowhere. And so she thinks it makes sense to turn to marginalized points of view to recover what has been obscured, what has been lost. On the other hand, though, when we adopt these views from below, as it were, we shouldn't imagine that these are innocent positions. No position, no perspective is innocent. And we should also avoid the danger of romanticizing and especially of appropriating the vision of the less powerful, right? While we claim to see from their perspectives. And further, when we talk about identities, whether marginalized or majority identities, we need to remember that none of us is immediately present to ourselves, right? We are each already a crowd. We are each already many. We are each in various ways internally split from ourselves, right? And so when we talk about identity, we should avoid any form of essentialism, even if sometimes essentialism can be strategic. We need to remember not to unduly ontologize any fixed sense of identity, right? We live in a world of heterogeneous multiplicities, And this multiplicity is not only around us, but within us. Subjectivity, as she says, is multi-dimensional, right? She writes on page 586, the knowing self is partial in all its guises, never finished, whole, simply there and original. It is always constructed and stitched together imperfectly and therefore able to join with another, to see together without claiming to be another, right? So for her, this is the promise of objectivity. As she writes, a scientific knower seeks the subject position not of identity, but of objectivity, that is, partial connection. There is no way to be simultaneously in all or wholly in any of the privileged or subjugated positions structured by gender, race, nation, and class, right? So she doesn't think identity produces science, but critical positioning. And she's saying that objectivity is really about taking note of critical positioning. And finally, she wraps up this article by a meditation on the sex-gender distinction, which has been so important to the feminist movement over the last many decades. And she's nervous about this distinction because she's worried that overemphasizing the gender side of the dichotomy makes the sexed body kind of a blank page for social inscriptions. On the other hand, a too intense sort of biological essentialism about the sexual difference risks ignoring the extent to which cultural norms and social expectations indeed do shape how the body gets inscribed into our languages and into our political power structures, right? So she doesn't want to lose authoritative biological accounts of sex, but she also doesn't want to lose the productive tension that is created by discourse about gender and the social construction of sex, right? So she's really trying to thread the needle here. And I'm, curious to see how this lands with you. This was 1988, right? And many of these issues are very much alive and well today, if not even more intensely debated, right? And at the end of the day, she's really just calling us to avoid thinking in dichotomous ways, right? She wants us to be responsible to and for the ways that our concepts affect the world, including our human companions, but also how our concepts affect non-humans. And ultimately, for her, knowledge is always about entering into relationships with that which is known. And she wants to overcome another dichotomy between an agent or a knower and the objects that are known, right? The objects that are known are never just inert. They don't stand still. They respond to our way of engaging with them, as I discussed in reflecting on Vincent Despret's work with participatory ethology, right? So the world encountered in our knowledge projects is an active entity, right? The agency of the world needs to be factored into our attempts to know that world, because we as knowers are not the only agents. And so knowledge production becomes more about a conversation with the agencies of the world. And rather than an inert object or collection of objects, Haraway invites us to consider the world more along the lines of the Southwest Native American myth of the trickster, right? The natural world is a kind of trickster. It has a sense of humor. It never does exactly what we expect it to, and so we need to remain in open dialogue or conversation with it, rather than pretend that knowledge could ever be final, that science could ever close accounts with what the world is or what a particular object is, right? Because that object is going to respond and react to our way of engaging with it. Knowledge is thus situated conversation, as Haraway puts it.